So today we're going to start off with Brenda Danilovis. She is an art historian and chief curator at the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. She has an MA in art history from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, where she taught art history. If you want to correct me on that, you can do that afterwards. She's the author and editor of numerous books and essays on the works of Joseph and Annie Albers, and has organized exhibitions of their work in US, Europe, Mexico, Peru, and Brazil. She has also published essays and articles on 20th century Southern African art and artists. And for us, I think that Black Mountain College here in Norway has been some kind of a magical myth. So it's extremely nice to have somebody that actually has first-hand knowledge of the school to come and talk. So welcome so much, Brenda Danilovis.
Good morning, and Lotte, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, but also for the invitation to be here. Thank you to Kyo, to the students, to the people that I've met in the few days that I'm here. And it was a great opportunity for me to discover a new country and a new city. And I'm very charmed by it and have had a wonderful few days here. So thank you all, and thank you for being here today. I think we will have time for questions afterwards. I think is that correct? Yes. Because I'm with that big build-up, I'm not going to talk that much about Black Mountain College itself. So if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them after. Okay. So let's go. Can you all hear me, by the way? Okay. Let me do this here. In 1924, Annie Albers published a short, pithy article titled Wooneconomie, or Home Economy. And in it, she made clear that economy in the home did not imply limitation, but rather a reshaping of the domestic environment to empower and liberate women. Traditional ways of furnishing, and Albers specifically mentioned seat cushions and curtains, enslave women and limit their horizons. The Bauhaus, she claimed, in developing clear structure of objects, suitable materials, and a new type of beauty, would change all this. In 1919, Germany, disillusioned, diminished and impoverished, having suffered a crushing defeat in World War I, was held responsible for the devastation that 4 years of a brutal war had visited on the entire European continent. In the midst of this national adversity, and against a landscape of political, economic, social and cultural uncertainty and turmoil, the Bauhaus was born in Weimar in April 1919. And this is an early postcard showing the Bauhaus, which was designed by the Belgian architect Henry van der Velde. Walter Gropius, its founding director, envisioned a school that would turn away from the old, decayed, and mostly destroyed Europe that had produced the war, to embrace an experimental and collaborative use of modern materials in buildings and objects that were simple, practical, inexpensive, and efficient. This would be achieved through skills acquired in workshops, where instead of teachers and pupils, there would be masters, journeymen, and apprentices, and a balance of free yet disciplined creativity. The ultimate goal was for architects and artists to make modern and therefore unify the everyday world through its built forms and the objects that would inhabit them. In his Bauhaus program, Gropius harnessed the symbolism of glass, which you see in the cover in this woodcut by Lionel Feininger, which depicts a sort of modernist, cubist, shining temple or cathedral of modernism. Gropius harnessed the symbolism of glass to a yearning for the new beginning that would rebuild German society in a modern way. For Gropius, glass, imagined as the material of the future by early 20th century architects and writers, and most notably Bruno Taut and Paul Scheerbart, invoked a romanticized Gothic period of harmony and unity. Scheerbart, in his influential futuristic 1914 novel, Glass Architecture, advocated the end of windows, buildings with walls of glass, and, in particular, the use of colored glass. Two young people who heeded Gropius's stirring call for a new start were Joseph Albers, son of a staunchly Catholic, small-town, working-class artisan builder in the industrial Ruhr region of northwest Germany, Westphalia, and Anneliese Elsa Frieda Fleischmann, 11 years younger than he, and a young woman determined to break from the privilege and affluence of her high bourgeois Berlin assimilated Jewish family background. Married in 1925, Joseph and Annie Albers would become an exemplary and legendary artist couple for the 20th century. A key piece of Gropius's ambition for the Bauhaus was the Vorkurs, or the preliminary course. It was intended to free students, many of whom had prior training in art, to free them from preconceptions, traditional ideas, and conventions of art making, and to develop the creative potential of each individual. Material studies, one part, but perhaps the most intriguing one, and most intriguing and original one of the Vorkurs, were developed as a means of exploiting the tactile and visual perceptual qualities of materials. Oops, I've got to be careful here. To provoke new models for designs. The open-minded experimentation produced a large, richly inventive, and mostly ephemeral range of objects. Like all new students, Joseph Albers was obliged to take the Vorkurs, taught by Johannes Itten in 1920 and 21. The focus was on understanding materials and awakening the creativity, and awakening free creativity. Money, however, was limited and materials were scarce. However, trash and scraps were abundant. One student remembered how Itten brought to the classroom, quote, wooden boards and strips, branches, rusted iron, crooked nails, broken screws, scraps of cloth and of paper. The task was to design something out of these waste materials. And that student continued, I was very impressed by a fellow student who sought out the rubbish dumps of Weimar and cut out holes in rusted sheets of metal, which he sealed with the bottoms of different colored glass, resulting in a kind of stained glass window. And this, he said, was Joseph Albers. So this is a work that was made, we believe, as part of the Vorkurs, assembling materials in Itten's class. And I have some details on it. I want to talk a bit about it, because I think it's worth considering that this rough, pretty crude material study, that's what it was, of colored glass and wire, is now, after almost 100 years, considered wholly original and one of Joseph Albers' masterpieces. And the value that he placed on it perhaps is emphasized by the fact that he saved it and brought it with him to America when he emigrated in 1933, although he had hidden it away in a box in the garage, and we discovered it later. A web of thin, and I'm showing you the back as well, because I think what's really interesting is how he cut the metal and then created this grid on the back with wire. So a web of thin spidery wires visibly holds the surfaces together. The supporting armature, unevenly cut from a metal grid, casts the ghost of its pattern onto the glass. A second, and in some places, third grid system of finer wire screens overlaps sections of colored glass within the grid and creates a network of wavering lines that simultaneously modulate the colors of the glass. And so I think the extremely rough, handmade nature of this work is fascinating. The fact that it's still in one piece after 100 years is another element of fascination. And you can see the little white patches where he used a kind of a putty, but nothing particularly refined or sophisticated to hold everything together, and then wound this wire, all of this wire together, and created this amazing, amazing work. The economy of using humble and limited materials to achieve surprising multiple effects would become a hallmark of Alba's process. Gottfried Heinersdorf, a professional glass fabricator who visited Albers in the glass workshop in 1921 at the Bauhaus, recognized the importance of such experimentation. Heinersdorf said, "Without doubt, the people at the Bauhaus who have not been burdened by tradition and by studies in craft are able artistically to create more important and more interesting works than our assistants." Albers and Heinersdorf would soon become collaborators in a group of small-sized, sandblasted colored glass objects that demonstrate the leap that Albers made from rough expressionist form into sleek, machine-produced abstraction. And these works date from 1925, and works also that could be reproduced as multiples, another form of economy. So the same stencil could be used over and over, and he did make multiple works, as we see here in these three versions of this 1925 work. By 1927, Albers had designed a grand commission for windows at the new Grassy Museum in Leipzig, a museum of applied arts, that were fabricated by Heinersdorf's firm. So I think it's really interesting to see this theme of glass and the inspiration of glass really being implemented in Albers's work at the Bauhaus. These are historical photographs of the interior of the Grassy Museum. The windows, which were created in sections, as you can see, were all destroyed during the bombing in World War II, but they have recently been amazingly restored because the archive of Heinersdorf's firm in Berlin still had some of the original structural drawings and plans, and so it's just a magnificent work, and you can see it at the Grassy Museum in Leipzig, which has not changed very much since 1927. Annie Albers, in the meantime, was developing her own form of economical design in the Bauhaus weaving workshop. Her meticulously executed designs for wall hangings demonstrate how economy of color and form can be manipulated and transformed into a rich visual feast. The sequencing of delicate balance of order and disorder in these designs appears to defy reasoned analysis and explanation. Annie Albers would later say that she had learnt most at the Bauhaus about form from Paul Klee. And Klee scholar, excuse me, I need some water. clay scholar Jenny Anger has shown how central Clay's design principles of particularly multiplication and polyphony were to these works. Albers came to understand those principles perfectly and was able to translate them into the gridded structures of the textiles. So take a moment to look at these incredible structures that she invented. Shifting personalities, politics, and places at the Bauhaus produced instability and constant change. By the end of 1922, Itten was teaching less and less. Gropius, recognizing Joseph Albers' considerable experience and gifts as a teacher, delegated parts of the four-course teaching to him. I keep doing this. Oops. Oops. Okay, I still want to. Delegated part of the four-course teaching to Albers, and when Itten finally left Weimar in March 1923, Gropius appointed Laszlo Moholy-Nagy to the vacant position. Albers and Moholy continued to teach the four-course in an uneasy partnership, which I will not discuss here. They appear to have taught alternate semesters until 1928, when Moholy left the Bauhaus and Albers took over the teaching himself. Albers described his teaching quite plainly, and he continued this investigation of materials as one of the major parts of the course. He wrote, or rather he said in a later interview, "I started so without any introduction to the possibilities of the material. I presented wire and said, let's try what we can do new with wire, give it new shape." And here we see some of the wire studies from the original photos from the Bauhaus. And some of them, including this one, still exist. And this was also part of his archive that Joseph brought with him to the United States. A great deal of student work, which he always collected. And so, unlike Clay, who had notes from teaching, Albers had no notes. His teaching was in the work produced by his students, and he kept that as his archive for what he had done in his classrooms. So what do we do with wire? What can we do with matches? What possible to develop from matches? And what can we do with match boxes? And there you see the matches and the matchboxes being used to create these great structures. Paper was another inexpensive everyday material that held out unexpected promise. And so I just also have some paper studies for you to show you, just to give you some idea. A lot of these have been published. You may have seen them before. Some have not. And this is Albers writing on the back of that specific photograph. These are all vintage photographs from the period. Here use is made of the tendency of paper to roll. Only cuttings of concentric circles form a roll of paper with no waste around these rolls. So again, the idea was don't waste anything, don't throw anything away. Take a sheet of paper, but you have to use the whole sheet in your construction. So some very classic examples of material studies from Albers' teaching. Oops. Let's leave that one on for a while. Albers invented his own terminology, possibly to distinguish his teaching from Moholy's. I decided, he said, that the material as such is the beginning, not only as in Itten's course, the surface. Matière is a better word, and he invented the word matière to talk about the way that materials can be combined and contrasted. He described his aim as, and I quote here from a piece that he wrote about his teaching in 1920, 1929. To open up, so this is his aim, to open up the possibilities for creating form freely, so that superficial forms we note with our fingertips and our eyes enter into relationships of contrast and balance, such as brick and burlap, wire mesh, and wood. Classification of this epidermis as essentially different in structure, facture, and texture is directed towards construction and aims to call forth careful observation and a new seeing. So I think it's really interesting that he emphasizes the haptic, the fingertips, and the eyes in terms of working with these materials. Material, then, becomes the protean and magical ingredient that through experiment and imagination would school the designers of the future to create new forms. So I want to say a few words about the Bauhaus as a community. While Bauhaus life is usually depicted as an endless party, creative, daring, boisterous, and often outrageous, a shared social life was intentional and essential to maintaining an efficiently functioning community. Gropius's wife Isa, who contemporaneously chronicled Bauhaus events in her diary, noted, "The great parties at the Bauhaus often came about at a time of greatest strife and unrest amongst the students. These fests, or festivals, and this is from the Metallic Festival, and you can see all those metallic masks up there, and the whole place was decorated, and there are wonderful images of it. These fests gave wonderful creative possibilities to voice criticism and to make fun of certain circumstances that had become irksome to students. Unspoken, accumulated anger was turned, and people who had taken a rather hostile attitude towards each other ended up working together. And Gropius specifically engineered some of these events to diffuse tensions at the Bauhaus. In 1925, the Bauhaus election, in the 1925 local elections, the Bauhaus in Weimar lost its financial supporters in the local government and was forced to close. It found a new location further north and closer to Berlin in Dessau. There, Gropius, with new funding from this growing industrial city, seized the opportunity to create his transparent, glass-walled school of the future, the iconic Bauhaus that, despite many upheavals, today stands reconstituted on its original site. But we should not lose sight of the fact that, well, first of all, up there is a contemporaneous postcard that shows how the Bauhaus was sort of located, separated from the town, and quite an architectural curiosity, but also that it underwent degrees of destruction and degradation as a result of historical events. And we see it in 1935, after the Nazis had taken over as a local school, and after the bombing in World War II, almost completely destroyed. So the Bauhaus that you see today in Dessau, and I'm sure some of you have been there, and it's very much in the news now with the centenary of the Bauhaus, is almost completely rebuilt from scratch. They had a recent exhibition there of the archaeological materials, the debris that remained, but it has been rebuilt. Yet, only 15 months after the new buildings were celebrated at a week-long opening party in December 1926, Gropius abruptly resigned and took off back to his private practice in Berlin. As his successor, he named Hannes Meyer, a Swiss architect he'd hired in 1927. Meyer, a committed socialist, insisted on a socially responsible Bauhaus, so he brought a new element into the Bauhaus ethos. The first line of Meyer's important 1928 article, Bauen, claimed, "All things in this world are a product of the formula function times or multiplied by economics. So none of these things are works of art." For Meyer, in the words of American Bauhaus student Howard Deerstein, architecture ceases to be the plaything of artists prepared to compromise human convenience, comfort, and health in the interest of a plastic ideal. The problem is no longer one of fitting ground plans to preconceived facades, of forcing human beings into preconceived ground plans. To the question of the place of aesthetics in this architecture of practical need, we answer that beauty lies in the simplicity and logic of its construction, the orderliness of its planning, and its genuine adaptation to the life unfolding within it. To Meyer's formula of function times economics, Albers' 1928 article Werkliche Form Unterricht added a vital component, namely that of material. Economic forms, Albers wrote, are the result of function and material. So he turns that whole formula around a little. The study of the working material naturally precedes the perception of function. Experimentation takes precedence over study, and a playful beginning develops courage. We do not start, therefore, with a theoretical introduction. In the beginning, we are concerned only with the materials. And I'll just show you quickly. That's a page from the Albers Foundation website, so you can look at it, just showing some of the furniture, almost all of it designed and made at the Bauhaus, apart from the two Black Mountain pieces, that Spanish-Mexican chair in the center and the table to the right. So after Marcel Breuer's departure in 1928, wood became the primary material in the Bauhaus workshop. We can actually just, in the Bauhaus furniture workshop. And Joseph Albers took over the instruction. Breuer's signature furniture with its steel tube frames disappeared. Experimental work focused on light, inexpensive, more expendable, almost throwaway forms in laminated veneers and plywood. The emphasis shifted away from what was conceived as bourgeois style to the constructions of lightweight, simple, useful furniture whose longevity was a minor consideration. And this was all under Meyer's influence. Deerstein, the student, recalled, one of the best pieces turned out in the furniture workshop was a chair by Albers himself. This was set together on 4 slender lengths of wood bent in such a way as to form the arms and legs and supports for the cushioned seat and back. The 4 wood members were held together by a pair of metal rods that were screwed to them. The chair could be disassembled to facilitate packing and shipping. So think IKEA. That was the TI-244 armchair that was featured in traveling exhibitions that Meyer organized in 1929. In many photographs, we see it. This was at the Grassy Museum, and then this exhibition in Basel, where you see both the chair and the way it is disassembled to show that it can be taken apart and packed. Albers later explained the chair's construction. My armchair and tea table represent, there's the armchair and there's the tea table. I'll just go back to the chair for a moment. And this is Albers' description, if you'd like to read it while I talk. My armchair and tea table represent new conceptions and new constructions in furniture design, providing both economic, industrial production, and simple contemporary appearance. And then he describes the chair and along with it, the table that he was exceptionally proud of because the frame, as it says there, consists of only 4 U-shaped members. They're very light, they can be taken apart. It avoids the customary legs and apron and heavy construction, and the glass top slides off, fits into grooves and slides off. And there is a drawing showing that it's also intended as a set of stacking tables, and you can see the construction there. In his short time as director, from 1928 to 1930, Hannes Meyer achieved notable successes for the Bauhaus, establishing an important photography workshop and a financially viable wallpaper workshop. In one of the ironies of Bauhaus history, that the socialist Meyer, who is often maligned and mislabeled communist with a capital C, negotiated a profitable commercial alliance for a Bauhaus-designed brand of wallpaper with a capitalist business, Gebrüder Rusch and Company in the north of Germany. And there's the catalogue and examples of die billigen Bauhaus-Tapeten, the cheap, the inexpensive Bauhaus. So again, this emphasis on producing something that is economical, cheap, and easy to install. Wallpaper was a more efficient, affordable, and technologically progressive material than the painted and often aestheticized surfaces produced by the wall painting workshop. In order for them to better understand how wallpaper was made, Albers took his students to visit a local producer to see the fabrication process at first hand. Such an alliance between artists who designed and factory workers who produced the wallpapers fulfilled the ideal of uniting art and industry that had eluded Gropius. A description of the surviving wallpaper designs suggests that they were closely related to the materie or factor studies, and here's one, from Albers's Vorkurs, seen here, which is composed of plant matter, it's in the caption, as well as two examples from the weaving workshop. Here are some wallpaper designs, I believe they are, that I found in the Deerstein archives in the Library of Congress. And I was very puzzled by them at first, and then I realized they were probably designs for wallpaper. And a description of these reads as follows. Imprints of stamps were arranged in dense patterns or structures of fabrics, threads, stalks, etc., rubbed through the paper in order to give it a surface structure. There were drawn arrangements of lines and dots. Many of the designs were done with sponges, brushes, cloths, combs, etc., or modeled on woven patterns. And so I see a direct link to the wallpaper, to the weaving workshop. With her husband running the wallpaper workshop in 1929, Annie Albers could not have failed to see the connection between textiles and paper as materials for wall covering. She would realize this spectacularly in a most unusual textile, the corrugated silver material for the auditorium of Hannes Meyer and Hans Witwer's trade union school in Bernau, just outside Berlin. And this is, again, a vintage photograph, but you can see the covering on the walls, not the screens, not those hanging, which was a kind of system of movable screens, the piano. This was a hall for performance and for lectures. And this is the school as it was in 1930. The material then was an acoustic material which Meyer had asked for from the weaving workshop because this square room, once it was built, had terrible acoustics, so they needed something to clad the walls. Apart from Gropius's Dessau Bauhaus building, this school, also recently restored, is the only remaining example of an authentic Bauhaus-designed collaborative work. Annie Albers recalled, at the Bauhaus, there was a need for doing something new, but what it looked like, nobody knew. I had an idea that I could make a surface that was made out of a kind of cellophane that was just coming in as a new material. Put in an interesting construction into the back of this material So it had on the surface a light reflecting quality, and on the back a sound absorbing quality. Oops, I went over that one. So there you see the front and the back of this material in the small samples that remain. Nothing was left of those wall coverings, completely destroyed. Albers was invested in and proud of the wall covering's scientific value. At that time, we were very intrigued by scientific angles to various problems, she said, and the Zeiss icon works made a kind of analysis of how the light-reflecting surface worked when light fell on the surface at different angles. And there's a photograph made by Zeiss icon with their chart of the measurements that they had taken off of the material. A light-reflecting material was something completely new at that time, as was a sound-absorbing material that had a light surface. So this was quite an intriguing kind of textile engineering, which is an important phrase. Albers was equally sensitive to the silence the textile demanded, its negation of bold visual or chromatic elements. In Paul Clay's terms, it was a serving work. As she explained, we are here led away from pronounced lineation and contours towards a surface active only through the slight optical vibration of intersecting raised and lowered threads. Shiny and dull, lighter and darker, this material will be quiet yet alive. In 1930, Albers received her Bauhaus diploma for developing this textile. So, I don't know how I'm doing for time. Am I okay?
That's fine.
Okay. I'll try and speed it up. I'm sorry. So in 1933, the Nazis closed the Bauhaus, and the very same year, Joseph and Annie Albers were invited to form an art department at a new liberal arts college in the USA. Black Mountain College, independent, experimental, progressive, and heavily influenced by the American philosopher John Dewey's ideas of learning by doing, was committed to having art making central to its curriculum. Joseph Albers' courses at Black Mountain began with a transplanted Bauhaus Vorkurs, as it had been called at the Bauhaus after 1928, Werklehre. I'm going to skip out a little bit here. Albers characterized the Bauhaus preliminary course as fundamental and elementary studies, experimental courses in materials, form, color, and drawing that valued students' inventions and discoveries, including their mistakes, more highly than solutions to given tasks. And here are some of the material studies from Black Mountain College, which I'm going to, again, skip over. Albers stressed the importance of teachers being practicing artists who did experimental studying and influential work by themselves, who in their teaching were independent and responsible for themselves. And the idea of community from the Bauhaus was one that was also taken over at Black Mountain College. So what had been taught at the more serious design-focused world of the Bauhaus became available to a wider audience at Black Mountain College, while Albers and his teaching remained closely identified with the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus, according to Albers, had no definite program. It was always ready to change, and in fact looked differently every year. There was no Bauhaus method, he explained, only a principle, which he summed up as being aware of the new tasks and new possibilities of today, and being alive and giving youth the right and the opportunity to grow through its own experience. It made perfect sense that such an enterprise was not geographically determined. Annie Albers' weaving class was likewise not aimed at industrial production, but at introducing new skills, methods of thinking, planning, and inventing. At Black Mountain, and there we have her student Alex Reed or Bill Reed, called in the weaving workshop, and I'll talk about him again in a moment. Building at Black Mountain College was a practical matter. Like the Bauhaus, they had very little funds. It was the Depression, and students had to take part in working in the fields, shoveling snow, serving meals in the dining room, and also building and doing renovations to the facility. While some of those students went on to become architects, artists, and designers, others became actors, poets, historians, musicians, and mathematicians. And now I just want to quickly switch to Mexico for the very last part. So Joseph and Annie Albers first visited Mexico in December 1935. Almost immediately, they found heady visual and intellectual stimulation in Mexican art and architecture. Their encounter... Sorry, there's the building one. And then their encounter in 1939 with ancient Zapotec jewelry discovered in Tomb 7 of the Monte Alban complex at Oaxaca was a defining moment in what became a lifelong obsession. Now renowned as an example of Zapotec architecture, in the 1930s, this archaeological site on the outskirts of Oaxaca had only just begun to be excavated. Made of gold, silver, rock crystal, stones, shells, and simple beads arranged in striking juxtaposition, the artifacts recovered from Tomb 7 were on display in the local museum where Albers photographed them in July 1939. The Alberses were traveling with their friend and former student, Bill Reed, who was by then a teacher at Black Mountain College. When they returned to Black Mountain, and inspired by the Monte Alban treasure, Annie Albers and Bill Reed began experimenting with ordinary items to create a strange and beautiful collection of objects of personal adornment. Their jewelry refused precious materials, relying instead on everyday objects of utility: paper clips, bottle tops, hairpins, pencil erasers, cotton reels, and washers, dissociated from their useful duties to create evocative forms and ornaments. Albers and Reed came to understand jewelry not as ornaments made valuable by the presence of rare gems and precious metals, but by the abstract values infused in them by their makers. According to Albers, the process of making, its surprise and inventiveness, bestowed the jewelry with a spiritual rather than a material value, giving it meaning and clearing the path for a new way of seeing. This was on the brink of the war, and in December 1941, of course, we know that America entered the war. Bill Reed was a conscientious objector, and thinking of him, I think, Annie Albers gave a talk early in 1942 about their work as a contribution to the war effort, and she tried to explain how this kind of creation was actually her way as an artist of contributing to the war, which she could not do in a direct way. To give our actions the meaning we want them to have implies questioning them anew. We felt our experiments perhaps could help to point out the merely transient value we attach to things. We tried to show that spiritual values are truly dominant. Our work suggested that jewels no longer were the reserved privilege of the few, but the property of everyone who cared to look about and was open to the beauty of the simple things around us. So I'm going to stop there because we have a short video of Annie Albers herself talking about her work. And so if we can switch over into that right away, that would be great. Thank you.
There was Philip Johnson in the doorway, and I said, "How nice to see you. Would you have time to have a cup of tea with us?" he came the next afternoon, and I showed him some of the things, and he said, would you be interested in coming to America? And that was just at the very brink of things happening in Berlin. And we said, why, of course. And 6 weeks after that, we received a letter from Black Mountain College, which was a newly founded college, very much on the experimental side. When we read that letter, and it came to the point that we are quite new and that we are interested in having art as a central point of our college. Would you be interested? And I remember that Joseph and I sat in our bedrooms with the legs hanging over the edge of the bed and read this letter together. And when it came to the word experimental, we both said, that's our place.
And when I met them in the Bauhaus, the one that attracted me was Annie. She was a person that you could make immediate contact with as a person. And I thought she'd be marvelous for Black Mountain.
Well, I had taken, amongst the things that we transported over, I had taken one loom along because I didn't know what I would find. And I had been asked to teach a class in weaving. And of course, to no surprise to me, there was no equipment of any kind available. So it took quite a while, months probably, till I found out what the word is for a loom and where one could get one and how one could get yarns and materials and so on. So it was quite a time till I found my way to this, what later became my main interest, pictorial weaving. And that was one of the early ones that I did at that time, and I didn't know where it would lead to. It was something new. For the summer sessions, Joseph had asked sometimes different people to come, amongst them Cage and Cunningham, and Edgar Kaufman was one of them. And Edgar had the idea, how about an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art? And of course, I living way up in the mountains and without connections, really, this was a wonderful suggestion. And he followed that up. And unfortunately, he dropped out. Philip Johnson took over and put up the exhibition. And that sounds very elaborate. It was one of the smaller rooms at the museum. And I was very impressed, really, the way that Philip went about it. He was then not famous yet, because he started with the lighting all around the room, various floodlights and so on. He took some of my pieces and placed them very intelligently, and I liked very much how he did that.
Alfred Barr started the whole idea of the modern museum as an entirely different ball of wax from museums in general. And Annie Albers, and in a minor way myself, were part of Alfred's revolution.
My seminars, which were here at Yale Architecture School, I thought I would turn around the whole process and let the students start with nothing and gradually invent their way upward to the point where we are today. Because by then I had been on the coast of Peru in the desert and knew how that felt in this completely lonely area with absolutely nothing there. And I said, now imagine that you are one of the first immigrants over the Bering Strait from Asia. What are the things that you will have to invent? And so we started, or they started, inventing some way of catching fish. They found that they had to invent something to carry the fish. They had to invent something against the very hot sun there. They had to invent some ways of perhaps getting a little cooler by digging into the earth. And so gradually they developed from stage to stage to stage till we arrived at our way of building. And I still believe that that is the way one should teach, not from the top down, but from the bottom up.
She turned out to be the dream designer of fabrics. I remember a copper cloth that she once designed that was just so beautiful you didn't know copper could do that. Fabric as an important part of architecture was what was her importance.
Well, Gropius, of course, had the idea that we should do not hand weaving so much, but the production by machines. He wanted for his law school building a rather masculine kind of image, and so I made some bedspreads, one in rusty red, one in green and one in blue, because I also thought this kind of pattern doesn't show a cigar hole. I wanted it very practical, and even when they're with their dirty shoes on it, it wouldn't show immediately. I also made a dividing curtain in black and jute color, which was very simple and very easily to take care of. Joseph had been asked by the Tamarind lithography workshop in California to come and do some lithos there. There was a woman there, June Wayne, who with the help of the Ford Foundation was trying to save lithography in America. There was hardly a workshop for them at that time, and that was a very nice idea. So we went, both of us, there, and he worked there in this workshop, and I was just a wife sitting around. And one day June Wayne asked me, "Don't you want to try something?" And that was nice because I was so useless there. So I gladly started, and since I was a weaver still at that time and had threads on my mind, I made a drawing that showed threads, or a thread, which did more than it can do in weaving. In the discipline of weaving, you are always tied to a horizontal, vertical, and here I was suddenly felt free to go into curves and interlacings and so on. I was so very happy about this technique, of which I didn't understand anything and still don't understand anything, except that you can reproduce this one piece in an addition of many, while in weaving you always come out with one piece, and it's very hard to get an exhibition together, because if by any good luck or chance a piece is sold, then your exhibition is limited to one piece less. And with lithography or any other printing technique, you are dealing with many. And also, I had the trouble, and probably others too, that galleries and museums didn't show textiles. That was always considered a craft and not art. And as I always said and still say, when it's on paper, it's art. As you notice, and when you can see the film, that I have a slight trembling in my hand, which makes it difficult sometimes in drawing or working with some paint. So I had wanted to invent something to circumvent that. And I made a small sketch and had it enlarged, photographically larger, and had that photo printed like a screen print. so that gave me a kind of scaffolding, and I painted into it, and that was then easier for me. And also I had used as a subject the subject of a wall there was in Mexico City, in the marvelous museum there, a Mayan wall which I admired very much, and I used the seam of the stones as the guiding lines for my drawing. And yesterday I saw them when we were packing them, and I didn't feel too depressed about them. I read a sentence a few days ago. Art makes you breathe easier. It gives you space. And I think that's a very good way of putting it. Well, you all know how great art can affect you. You breathe differently.
Thank you so much for an amazing talk, and I have so many thoughts now. We do have time for a couple of questions. Is there anyone that would like? Now you have the opportunity. Anyone who would like to ask?
Ja.
Yes. Kan jeg bruke den? Can I?
Nei, det går uten.
Ja, det går fint.
In Norwegian or English?
English, or else Brenda.
For most people, the furniture of Bauhaus is the steel, rubber,
Yes.
in the first period. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting, this picture of the soft, new wood technique furniture, and that it goes the link to the best designers in Finland and Denmark, in, for example, 47 and after. It gets different auto and in many Danish and Finnish designers. So I don't know the public know this, but it's very interesting for me to see the connection.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean, it was really through Maya that Albers experimented with wood and with bent plywood, not so that, it was laminated wood that he used for these forms, and yeah, original.
So that's very connection to Wegener's most famous chairs from 48, 49,
Yes.
50, and Alvarato's from 46 and after.
So I don't know that Alto ever saw Albers' chairs, but of course they were made 20 years before that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. They would you to speak into the phone.
Oh, okay.
Actually,
Can I talk into here?
Does this?
This one? No, this one.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. I think you all heard that.
Yeah.
yeah, he did.
To follow up on that,
Yes.
Walter Gropius met actually Alvarado in Stuttgart in 1927. He went to Stockholm in 1928 to lecture, and he went to the Stockholm exhibition in 1930, where he also met Alvarado. So obviously these ideas of a warmer material that suited the people better, because they've always heard that the steel rod was too cold for your body. Evidently came from the connection to Alto, and that was his invention as well. He started with steel rod as well, Alvarado, but he realized that in the north, especially here in our climate, these chairs were rather cold towards the body. So evidently this connection with Alto that comes already in 1927 is important here.
Interesting.
Can I have one short? And that's perhaps today, it's stupid to put point on designers, but if you should do this stupid play to put point, to make a list today, a lot of people will say that just Alvarado and Wegener in Denmark, so Wegener in Denmark and Alto in Finland is perhaps the two most loved designers for people that's more interested in design than the normal.
Yeah, I think I would also just like to emphasize, though, that with Albers, it was also a question of economy. of cheaper materials, easier construction. It could be cut easily in the workshop, and using as little material as possible to achieve the final effect. So that was really important, you know, for him.
One comment?
Yes. As a matter of fact, Aino and Alvarado went to Wonderdark in Zurich in 1935 and started to do Alvarado furniture there in Zurich. And a lot of Bauhaus people worked at Wonderdark. Among them was Otti Berger, who was a friend of Annie Albers and whom I've done some work on. And as a matter of fact, Aino Alto was very much in favor of her textiles. She acquired some of her textiles for the Artek shop in Finland, and some of the furniture recovered with Otti Berger's textiles. But we do not know yet if there are any Albers textiles there as well. And there may well be. The Artek company's archive is quite large and has not been investigated into this respect yet. But there may be also Annie Albers textiles there.
Thank you, Vidar. That's really interesting, and also establishes possibly some connection between Joseph and Annie and Scandinavia.
We have to move on, but first of all, thank you so much. And also, Brenda brought this as a gift from Mari Lending, working at the architect school. It's a translation of the Bauhaus Manifesto, and I guess that in Norwegian, and I guess that I'm going to keep one for myself, so it's gone. And then you have like, you have 5 left. I was thinking about asking Mari Lending, that's, I could actually maybe make a new print of it at our school, because I think we should have it at our school. So, and we have this machine where you can print things.
And it was published in a journal.
Huh?
It was published in a journal called Argos.
Agora.
Agora. I don't know where that is, if that's American or a British journal, but so the Norwegian translation.
Yeah. So I'll leave it here, or I could sell you like one load each, and I can earn a lot of money from who's going to have these 5. So I'll leave them here. Thank you again.